So we are going to continue in Imrei Binah today. There is the packet that has 2 pages per sheet. It should say chapter 1. We're still there. I printed off chapter 2 because I was feeling ambitious. But hopefully there's enough for everybody. I only printed out a few of the Hebrew ones, but I know there's another one right here if anybody else wants. So we introduced this last week, and we we spoke a long time about what this discourse is about and how it came to be and who it was created, who it was written for. And we began to talk about the Shema. Just to recap a little bit about what we spoke about last week, this is largely considered, this discourse, this book really, is largely considered to be one of the most esoteric and complex teachings within the Chabad library, written by the second Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, who we refer to as the Mitzler Rebbe. And it was written for a specific chassid, for a specific follower of his, who, the story goes that on the winter days when they were short like they are now, when there's not so much daylight, and in Russia it's even less, so he would wake up in the morning before dawn and begin to prepare for the morning service, and then he would pray the morning service, and then he would do all of his learning afterwards that was connected with the morning service. And then by the time he finished that, it was time for the afternoon service, so he would start preparing for the afternoon service, and then he would pray the afternoon service, and then he would finish the afternoon service and learn everything that was related to wrapping up the afternoon service. And then it was all of a sudden time for the evening service, and he would prepare and then pray for the evening service, and he would spend the whole day in prayer. So that's the person for whom this was written. So something to bear in mind when we delve into these very deep texts. But so there are 3 sections to this work. This work is called Imrei Binah, which means the sayings of contemplation. And the first section is called the Gateway, I think is how they translate it in the English. And then there's a section on Tefillin and a section on Tzitzis. This first section that we're learning is all about the Shema and understanding the Shema. So last week we said, we brought a teaching from the Talmud that says that anybody who extends or elongates the recitation of the word Echad, his days and years are extended and elongated. Right? The word Echad is the last word of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad means one. And the more we draw out the word Echad, the more God draws out the length of our life. And we mentioned as an aside that there are some who have the custom to do this verbally in the recitation of the Shema, and that the Chabad tradition is really that it means to immerse in contemplation and meditation, and that we don't say Echad really long with our words, but rather it's that we delve deep into the reflection and the contemplation of what Echad, of what singularity is all about. So we asked a number of questions on what does this mean, and we said in general we have to understand a little bit what are the mechanics of the Shema, right? What are we doing? So the first thing that we suggested was we spoke about the concept of elevation, that Shema is elevating our consciousness. That when we say the word Shema, we are expanding our perception, expanding our perspective, right, to elevate to a higher space. And that's why the word Shema, which means to reflect, or to, literally it means to hear, but it also has a connotation of understand, right? Like we say, we know the Torah tells us that the Jewish people, when they received the Torah, said Nasa v'nishma, we will do and then we will understand. Nasav and Nishma. Nishma means we will hear, but in that context, it means we will understand, right? So Shema Yisrael means hear, O Israel, but also means understand, O Israel. So understanding is the same concept, or is connected intrinsically with the verse from Isaiah, which says, Sa'u marem einechem, lift up your eyes heavenward. The first letter of each of those words, Sa'u marem einechem, spells Shema. So the concept of Shema is almost a shorthand for elevating our consciousness. So that's the first idea of Shema. And then we said that this was connected with the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, of this self-sacrifice, of our capacity to give ourselves up, to leave our own personal limitations out of a commitment to God's singularity, to give ourselves up to God's singularity. And we said, and then we presented a bit of we got into a little discussion where we started talking about Hashem versus his midos, God versus his attributes. And we said that generally we say that when we call out to God, when we pray to God, when we have a conversation or a discussion with and about God, specifically in the realm of prayer, we are speaking to God himself, God's essence, and not to any specific attribute. And we said that it is inappropriate to speak to God's attributes when we are in the mode of prayer, right? We maintain this almost childlike sense of purity, of simplicity in how we conceive of God in the times of prayer, which is to say that we are speaking to what we conceive of as God's essence and not individual traits. And we said at the same time there is a Talmudic tradition that identifies that that we do examine or look at God's traits in prayer. And we said that these are the two main prayers, or the two main prayer modalities of the Shema versus the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the silent meditation standing prayer. And that when we say the Shema, it's focused on singularity, so we're orienting towards God's essence. Yet when we say the Shemona Esrei, and we have 18 individualized brachas, 18 individualized blessings for 18 different, that speak to 18 different traits or 18 different physical realities that we experience. So in that we do have some conception of God's traits in some ways, and we do have that as somewhat of a consciousness. As an aside, you see this in prayer books that are written with Kabbalistic intentions in the Shemona Esrei. So usually the way we write God's name is Yud K Vav K, right? The four letters Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. And those are, and we don't, we're actually going to bring later today, later in the discourse, that there is a line from the Talmud that says, my name is not called the way it's written, right? And we don't vocalize that word. Instead, we say, when we see that word, Yud Ke Vav Ke, we say Adonai, right? We don't say it the way it's written. There are, if you notice in the prayer book, while we don't pronounce it, typically the name of God, Yud Ke Vav Ke, will have vowels on it. Those vowels are actually borrowed from how Adonai is vocalized, but there are other ways to vocalize the name of God. None of them are pronounced, but it is a sort of meditation. And you see in Kabbalistic prayer books that in each one of the 18 blessings of the Shemona Esrei, of the Amidah, there are different vocalizations for God's name in each one of the blessings. Just as an interesting factoid. You have a question?
I've heard it pronounced in English a couple of different ways.
With a J? With a J?
That's one.
Yeah. So,
The other one's with a Y.
yeah, so both of those are incorrect. We refrain from saying them because we refrain from trying to vocalize it in any way. But those are, so the vowels of Adonai are, of the word Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, are superimposed onto Yud Ke Vav Ke when it's written typically. And so that's how that pronunciation comes to be. It's not native to the word itself. The reason why they do that is to sort of be a hint or a reminder that we say it as Adonai and not as Yud Ke Vav Ke pronounced. But none of them have any source in, we try to, we don't say them because like we don't vocalize it in any way. But that's like it's not in our tradition. That
They listed our balance.
yeah. Okay. So and then we said that on the one hand, the concept of the Shema is all about elevation, right? We said it's about elevating our consciousness, and it is for this reason that we cover our eyes, we disconnect from the physical world, and we go upwards. And then we said, but at the same time, there is a tradition based on the Zohar and other places that it is in fact a download. Before we were saying that the Shema is an elevation, and then either Baruch Shem, the line that follows it, or the Shemona Esrei is the download that comes afterwards. After we're able to elevate our consciousness, we're able to draw down, to extend down, to come back into our physical body, into our physical space with more God consciousness, with a more sophisticated perspective. But then we said, this second tradition tells us that in fact the Shema is a download. And the download is, that saying the Shema is infusing within all four directions of the world, north, south, east, west, and up and down, which are the six directions, infusing God's sovereignty into the physical world, meaning drawing down, downloading God consciousness into our perception of the physical world to elevate the world. And we said this is apparent in the letters of the word echad, which means one. Aleph, the first letter of the word echad, is alufei shel elam, is the ruler of the universe, the master of the universe. And the singular, right? Aleph is the first letter, so it tells us the one. And then ches, the second letter, has the numerical value of 8. And that tells us the seven firmaments, they're called, the Zion Rakias, the 7 firmaments or heavens, and then the one physical earth equals 8. And then Daled, 4, the third letter of Echad is Daled, which is 4, is the 4 directions, north, south, east, west. So what that means is that the Aleph infuses the Ches and the Daled, that the singularity infuses the 8 dimensions of reality, the 7 spiritual and 1 physical, and the 4 directions of orientation, north, south, east, west. And that this is all part of a download, and that this is a distinct tradition and in some ways an opposite tradition, an opposite effect, a download effect as opposed to an expansion of consciousness. And so we left off in the Hebrew, it's in the 3rd paragraph. And could you hand me that packet just so I can, yeah. Thanks. Just so I know where we are in the English. Benyan Kameshikos of Atu. We are on page 31, the first paragraph, the first full paragraph. The explanation of the matter is as stated in the Talmud. Veha Inyan. In the Hebrew, we're on the 3rd paragraph on page Aleph, on page 1, which is the first full paragraph on the left-hand side of the page, which begins Veha Inyan. Ve'inyan hu k'meshikosav atu ha'idna lav echad hu. The Gemara in Pesachim asks, is his name not one now? V'lama amar b'yemahu yiyah avaya echad u'shmei echad. The verse tells us, and we say this in Aleinu, that b'yemahu, on that very day, yiyah Hashem echad u'shmei echad. God will be one and his name will be one. We're told that this is a messianic reality. So the Talmud asks on this, Atu ha'idna, but now at this time, is his name not one? Right? So the answer that the Gemara gives is what we just said, which is that Leishani nichtav ani nikra, I think is the lashon of the Gemara, that the way that I'm written is not the way that I'm called. That the name of God, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei, is not pronounced Yud Kei Vav Kei, and so there is some disparity between his name and what we call him. The Mitzvah Rebbe says over here that what does this mean? It means that now the Aleph, the first letter, the singularity of Echad, Mustar v'Nel and B'vav Ksavis is hidden within these 6 dimensions, right? Meaning that in this physical world we don't actively perceive godliness. But when Mashiach comes, is Galavi Havaya Echad Begiloi. We're going to see in all of the physicality, in the multiplicity, we're going to see the singularity, we're going to see God's essence. And this is in fact the entire meditation of what we reflect on when we say the word Echad, when we say that God is one, when we recite the Shema, to crown him, to make him king, and to singularize, so to speak, him within the multiplicity of the heavens and the earth, that all should reflect, all should express his singularity. That we should download the God consciousness into the confines of the physical world, that it reflects God's singularity like it will when Mashiach comes. This isn't to say that right now he's not one, right? Right now he's also still one, right? There's no difference between, from his perspective, there's no difference between now and when Mashiach comes, in the sense that his singularity is not lacking in any way, right? He is essentially singular. V'chein, mashakasa bezer de'yu v'chayu chad mamesh, and that similarly, when we talk about him being unified and him being singular or unifying with other things like the Sfirot, this is all from a download perspective, right? That his singularity is essential, but he's singularizing with lower things that they also become subsumed and consumed and elevated into his singularity. The Sfirot become unified with him and they reflect his singularity. And this goes in the face of the kavanah, of the intention that we mentioned previously, which is that the Kabbalists tell us that the kavanah, the intention, the meditation and the reflection of Shema is to elevate our consciousness and to transcend our own limitations, to become consumed and subsumed into God's singularity. Meaning, there is the experience of going up, of going out of ourselves. That's what the Kabbalists see as the work. And then the second idea is to draw down, to integrate into our constrained consciousness, into our limited consciousness, into our natural orientation, and a more sophisticated sensitivity to God consciousness that unifies and harmonizes the world that we live in and our perception. So these are 2 different modalities, 2 different meditations in how we approach the Shema. So the Mitzvah Rebbe continues. In fact, these two ideas, we're on page 32, the paragraph begins in truth. These two ideas are really one, Vaha Vaha Talya, and in fact, they are each dependent. They are dependent upon one another, right? The elevating of the consciousness is dependent on the downloading of the consciousness, and the downloading of the consciousness is dependent on the elevating of the consciousness. And in fact, we have to be able to contain both of these ideas in our mind simultaneously. Or maybe not simultaneously in one moment, but that they are both elements of what the meditation is. So first we focus on elevating our consciousness, on going up, which is the unification of the 10 spheres, the unification of Atzilut with the emanator, right? The Atzilut is the world of emanation. The Matzil is the emanator, meaning God's essence. So it is unifying Atzilus with God's essence, meaning that what we perceive as the ways in which God expresses himself, what we perceive as the ways in which God relates to creation, right? That God has the capacity for chesed, or God has the capacity for chachma, or any of these things, right? Wisdom or kindness. The fact that God is able to express himself becomes unified with God's essence. The way they are totally unified and singularized and included within the essence of or Ein Sof. Like what is mentioned in the book Sefer Yetzirah, Hakashura Bagachalas. Okay, Gavna. Sefer Yetzirah gives a mashal, gives a parable. And it says that there are different types of inclusion, different types of relationship between two things, different ways to unify with something that we see sort of extensions of in this physical world. Meaning to say, we talk about God's essence unifying with Atzilus, right? With the 10 spheres of Atzilus unifying with the emanator. And so that's a fundamentally abstract concept. And so there are different things in this physical world that we can see, that we can sort of extrapolate from seeing those things to understand a little bit of how that works. So the example that Sefer Yetzirah gives is the way the flame is connected or connected to the coal. That when you look at a piece of coal that is burning, the flame is totally connected to that piece of coal. And it is there in an active state. The contrast that's given there is a flint stone, where the flame is there in a conceptual state, in a potential state, right? If you strike the flint stone, it will combust and create a flame. So somewhere, you can't say that it's in the flint stone itself in an active way, but that conceptually there is some potential within the flint stone for flame. So it's a different type of connection. It's a little more removed, right? But the way that a piece of coal is consumed by the fire, whereas like if you look at wood that's burning, you see there's like the wood and the flame, and it's sort of different, right? If you think of a candle, right, the candle has the wick, and there is the fuel from the candle is the wax, and that's sort of the flame sits on top of that, right? Whereas with the coal, they become really one and the same, right? That a coal can be red hot, and the flame is essentially the same as the coal. Like when the coals get really, really hot, they don't even have any flames anymore. They're just so intensely hot, right? So that's a more intrinsic connection. That's what we talk about. That's sort of how we can conceive in our mind's eye of something like the Eser Spheres, the Yud, the 10 spheres of Atzilus unifying with God's essence. Like it says in the same place in Sefer Yetzirah, it says 10 spheres without what? And what that means is without any muhus. Muhus is essence, without any existence, without any whatness, without any identifying features, without any individualized features. They become totally unified with their source. Same way the flame of the coal is totally unified with the coal. Excuse me. Messiah, like it concludes over there, which is brought into Kunei Zayir, V'lam mikol inun midas klal, that he is not comprised of any midas. God's essence is not a composite of any traits. V'hainu elav dafka v'leilu midaisav, and this is what it means that we call out to God's essence and not to his traits. That we focus, that we look past any discernible features, any defining characteristics, and we focus on God's essence. And that is when the spheros are totally subsumed by God's essence, we look past the individualization of different traits of wisdom versus understanding, kindness versus discipline, and we focus on God's essence. All of that is unified like the flame within the coal. So that's the first part of the meditation, to focus, to elevate our consciousness, to conceive, to perceive more in a more sophisticated, in a more sensitive, in a more, dakistic, in a more refined way, the singularity of God's essence. That's the first part. And then after that, yichaven b'yichud hasheni. We focus on the second yichud. So a yichud is a unification. So this is the first yichud, where we've unified from an elevated standpoint. And then we focus, so this is unifying his midas, his traits with his essence. That's the first thing we do, starting from traits and working up to essence. And then the second one is starting from essence and unifying that with traits, going back down. So first we see the definition, and we push ourselves to go past the definition to undefined singular essence. And then once we've elevated our consciousness to perceive undefined singular essence, then we can draw that sensitivity down back into our understanding of definition of traits. That's the second one. And this is drawing down. And this is what it means to make God king in this physical world and in the finite, defined reality, to bring his sovereignty, to bring his unity, to bring his singularity into the physical, into the defined, right? Into the finite. And this is why we have to extend the daled specifically of echad, right? The Talmud tells us that we have to extend the word echad. We have to say echad longer, right? We elongate our pronunciation of the word, either articulating it verbally or mentally in our mind. And he says this is why specifically, not only is it just the word echad we elongate, but of the word echad, specifically we elongate the daled, the last letter, the D sound of the word, the duh, because in this second meditation, it is about drawing down the singularity into the definition, and the daled is the four directions which are the expression of definition. How does that sound? Little sophisticated, right? Something that just pops into my head as an aside. The Baal Shem Tov founded the Hasidic movement in the early 1700s, and before he founded, before he revealed himself as the Baal Shem Tov, as this, holy person who could teach the secrets of the Torah in a way that people could use to integrate into their Judaism, right? That people could conceive of and people could actually grasp. So he spent a number of years learning with Achia Shaleni. Achia Shaleni is a person from Tanakh, from the Bible. He is actually Eliyahu Navi's teacher, Eliyahu Navi's Rebbe. He's Elijah's teacher. And Elijah was obviously a mystic, right? He ascended to heaven in his body. And that's why he comes to all the brisim and he comes to our Passover Seder. So his Rebbe, his teacher, was Achia HaShaleni. His name was Achia, and he was from Shiloh, from the town of Shiloh. And the tradition is that the Baal Shem Tov studied with him for many years, and then Achia Shaleni told him that he has to go reveal himself. And this was on his 36th birthday. He had to go out and tell the world that he was the Baal Shem Tov. He was the master of the good name, and he was a Kabbalist who was able to teach and uplift the Jewish people at a time where the Jewish people were really struggling. And one of the stories that we have about the Baal Shem Tov that is actually one of the few things that we have from the Baal Shem Tov that he actually wrote himself is a letter that he wrote to his brother-in-law. And this letter serves as really, in a lot of ways, the mission statement of the Hasidic movement, especially the mission statement of Chabad. And the Baal Shem Tov writes that one Rosh Hashanah, I was ascending in a spiritual ecstasy, meditative state to higher realms. And he says, I was going higher than I had ever been before. And he says, and he's writing all of this in a letter to his brother-in-law after it happens. And he says that I even asked at one point, am I dead? Because I've never been so high before. And they said, you're not dead. And he said, they took me to a chamber that I had never seen before. And it turned out to be the chamber, the Heichal of Mashiach. And so he goes into the chamber and he says, E Masai Ka'asi Mar, which is a quote from the Talmud. There is a story in the Talmud where Rabbi Shua ben Levi wants to meet Mashiach, and he is told in a divine, he's told, I guess by Eliyahu Navi, he's told to go to this marketplace where there's lepers, and all the lepers do one thing, and this one leper does a different thing in the way they change their bandages, and that's Mashiach. And he goes up to him and he says, E Masai Kasimar, when are you going to come? When is the master going to come? So this is what the Baal Shem Tov says to Mashiach in this spiritual experience, in this spiritual chamber. And he's writing this all down in this letter to his brother-in-law. And the story goes, the way everybody quotes the story, is that the Baal Shem Tov, the Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov, when your well springs spread outwards, right? Your well springs are the well springs of Chassidus, of the mystical dimension of the Torah. And when you flood the world with your teachings, that everybody in the world knows your teachings, then Mashiach's going to come. It's going to totally transform and change the fabric of reality to the point that the world can sustain the God consciousness of the Messianic era. That's how everybody tells the story. That's what he writes in the letter. But he continues in the letter, and in fact, Mashiach told him two things. He told him, like, and he also told him that when all of the Jewish people are miyachid yichudim the same way you are, when they affect the unifications, when they unify the unifications the same way the Baal Shem Tov does. So these are yichudim. This is what a yichud is, right? So this meditation is what it means to be miyachid yichudim, to create these unifications. that what we do in our meditative state, in our mind, in reflecting on these concepts. So first, the elevation of going from midos to essence, from definition to undefined singularity, and then drawing that back down from undefined singularity into definition. That's what it means to be miyachid yichudim, to create these yichudim, right? This is what a Kabbalistic meditation is all about. Obviously not for the faint of heart, right? And these two meditations and the effect, these two unifications, right? To unify means to make one. It means to harmonize in our perspective, right? Our mind is fragmented, our perception is fragmented, and so to unify that, to harmonize that, is to elevate the way we perceive our own existence, the way we perceive existence, generally speaking, the way we perceive essence, or at least what we conceive of as essence. They're both one. V'hu nirmaz ba'is ha'alef, the echad. And they are, in fact, both hinted, they are both expressed by the first letter of echad, which is the aleph. Let's see here. Page 33. Sha'alef hu eisius pella b'hepech asvan. Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, is spelled the same way if you wanted to spell the letter B, right? It would be B-E-E, right? Or if you spelled H, it would, I don't know how you spell H, but anyways. Yeah, right? So in Hebrew, you can spell out the letters too. So Aleph is spelled Aleph Lamed Pei, or Fei. And so the spelling of the letter tells us something about the letter, right? And we know that there are a number of different letter swapping traditions, which goes back to a Kabbalistic concept that tells us that God created everything through speech, right? And God, in fact, is constantly creating everything through speech. He is always speaking everything into being. The place where we know that from is the beginning of the Torah, where it says, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and he spoke all of these things. Vayomer Hashem, God spoke and said, let there be light, and the light was created through his speech, right? So there are 10 utterances, 10 statements, creative statements that God makes in the Bereshis, in the Genesis narrative, and there are all sorts of things that are created through his speech in those 10 statements, but not everything, right? He says, let there be light. He says, let there be grass, let there be water, different types of animals, but he doesn't say, let there be computers, right? So how do computers come to be? So what we understand Kabbalistically is that the words, the letters, are really the building blocks for creation. The letters, and this goes back to a concept that the Sefer Yetzirah, maybe the Boher mentions, that letters are like bricks or blocks, and the statement that's made is that 2 stones build 2 houses because 2 letters can make 2 words, and 3 stones make 6 houses because 3 letters can make 6 different words. So the letters are the building blocks. Now, for the things that are articulated, so God said the word Esav, grass, and grass came to be. And for computers, he didn't say computers, but there are different ways that the letters can be switched around and substituted for other letters and turned around in different ways, and numerical values of letters and different things of different traditions and how we play with the Hebrew language that are tools through which God creates other things, right? Which is to say that there are some things that God creates and they are expressive of, they express their creator. And other things require a lot more permutations and a lot more reformations in order to exist, right? There are some things that are more intrinsically attuned and aligned with being created, like grass is just that expression. So it's more aligned, and then other things require a more involved recipe, and so it's multiple steps. Anyways, so one of these traditions, that was all a really long preface to say that one of these traditions is to read the word backwards, right? We can take the letters of the word and look at them backwards, and that also will create a word too. So for Aleph, the word Aleph, which is spelled Aleph, Lamed, Fe, if you read that backwards, it spells Pella, and Pella is a wonder. So there is something wondrous about the singular. There's something wondrous about the Aleph, the one, the singular, the Alufa Shel Olam, the master of the universe. Va'inyan Yidua, and the idea is known. Shekasher b'chinas ha'chochma ma'ayin temotza leb'chinas yash dafke, az nikra Aleph lashon ulpana. Limud. That when Aleph, Chachma is insight. It is the flash of insight that is born out of nothing, right? It is born out of the darkness. The verse says, Chachma ma'ayin timatza, that Chachma, wisdom, extends out. Timatza means found, but it also means to extend out. Me'ayin, from nothing. Literally, the verse says, Chachma ma'ayin timatza, from where can you find wisdom? You can't find wisdom anywhere. It's something that's intrinsic, right? It's something that comes from you. It comes from the more you reflect and the more you learn and the more you integrate and the more you take in, then wisdom develops, and we see somebody as a wise person, but it's not quantifiable, and he has 27 wisdoms, right? It's something abstract. It's something elusive. It's hard to determine where it comes from. But the Kabbalists see this verse as saying that the attribute of wisdom, which we identify as the first of the 10 sfirot, is born out of the nothingness, is born out of undefined. This is where we had the idea of in the Archimedes story, when he has the eureka moment, right? That it is in not being engaged with the problem, with the matter at hand, when he's just taking a bath, when he's not doing anything, when he is essentially doing nothing, it is there that the insight, that flash of insight, is born out of the darkness. He becomes illuminated by this insight, and it is a eureka moment. So, Chachma, ma'ayin tematzah l'b'chinas yesh dafke. It is from this that yesh, that existence, comes to be, right? Chachma is the first place that we identify existence as being. So when that happens, az nikra Aleph lashon ulpana limud. So then Aleph is connected with the idea of ulpan, which means limud, right? Has anybody heard the word ulpan before? Ulpan is in modern Hebrew. If you move to Israel and you have to learn the language, ulpans are these places where you go to learn Hebrew. So ulpan is a word that means study. So it has the same letters as Aleph, as the letters Aleph. So when the flash of insight gives birth to a new concept, that is the process of learning that is known as ulpan, right? When we meditate on something and we reflect on something and we think about something, the new insight, the eureka moment that we have creates a new concept in our mind, right? The beginning of that is the chachma turning into a yesh, the insight turning into a something, turning into a concept. Shehu gilui amshacha ma'ayin ha'ne'elam deb'chinas ha'keser k'mei elafcha chachma. And this is downloading from Keser into Chachma, right? Keser, which is in some ways undefined, right? Keser is undefined. Keser means the crown, and it is the will, it is the capacity for pleasure, it is more intrinsic to our soul than Chachma in how Chachma relates to the other. In other words, if you had to point to where your wisdom was, most people would point to their mind, right? Wisdom is an intellectual experience. So it's mappable on the body. Keser, which is will, desire, and pleasure, if you had to point to any of those things on your body, there's no particular place where they feature, right? It's sort of all-encompassing, and in that sense, it's sort of undefined. So the will is the place from which the nothing state, the undefined state, from which insight is born, from the darkness from which insight emerges. But it is from a nothing into a something. So Keser to Chachma is this idea, the development of Chachma is this alafcha, this learning process. And it actually becomes the source for all definition, for these 6 directions, north, south, east, west, and up and down. And it becomes the source for all of that, which tells us about, which reminds us or orients us back to the master of the world, the singular essence of God. And this is what we say when we say Baruch HaMakim, when we refer to God as the omnipresent, right? Hamakim means the space. So when we refer to God as the omnipresent, that He is the place of the world, right? Meaning to say that within God's existence, within God's essence is our existence, right? Meaning that the world isn't divorced or distinct from God. But before it's been actualized, before this insight has been actualized, shenikra pella, at that point, instead of being called alafcha, which is about, or ulpan, which is about learning, which is a conscious experience, it's called pella, which is wondrous, which is a unconscious, undefined experience. And it precedes any definition. And it is, and there, any type of definition or directionality is totally suspended because it's an undefined essence. V'hainu elav v'leilu midaysa v'chidua de b'chinas kaser shenikra pella hu nechshav b'chinas atzmas arensav de achtus pshuta de lamikol inun midus klal v'hulim sidis nefesh be'echad mamish. And so this pella, this wondrous state, is the singular unified state, which is the expanded consciousness experience, as opposed to which is the experience that we have of Mesiras Nefesh, of going out of our own personal limitations to elevate our consciousness to that singular. But Al Kain, the last Al Kain 35, thus it is necessary. Al Kain tzarich tchila l'chavein b'chinas yichud v'skalas das esfiras baransav atzmei b'bitul avaya, b'bitul vav ksavis. So therefore, first we have to push ourselves to reflect beyond definition and to orient towards God's essence. And after we have sufficiently pushed our mind to go past the boundaries of definition and of finitude, of things like directionality or of traits, and to really work to perceive something essential, singular, and undefined. After we do that, then we're able to conceive in some way of how that undefined singular essence unifies with finitude, with definition. After we're able to, first the work is to eradicate any notion of definition in our perspective. right? To push our mind to not see definition, to see past definition, to see essence. After we can conceive of essence in some undefined singular way, then we're able to draw that back down, to reorient that towards our understanding of definition and to integrate it into our defined reality. V'hu aleph aluf shel elam kedrusha rizal. And this is the aleph and this is why the aleph, the first letter of the word echad, this is all contained within this aleph, telling us that aleph is the aluf shel elam, the master of the universe. V'hava v'ha'talya. And we see how each one of these two concepts are interrelated, are interconnected. Because if we don't push our minds to see past definition, then we can't integrate the essence into the defined, right? If we're stuck in a mindset, in a conception, in a reality that is coming from a state of definition, of finitude, then we can't integrate essence, the undefined singular, into that definition. We have to first eradicate all definition, all limitations, anything that we're holding on to that's trying to contain our conception. We have to eradicate all that, to push past that, to see essence, to perceive of the singular, in order to then reintegrate that concept into our perception, into our appreciation for definition. Meaning, if all I'm doing is seeing a table, I can't conceive at any point of there being a source of the table, or a source of the table's vitality, the source of the table's existence. I have to first push past any finite notion of there being a table and to focus on the essence, the source, to then realize that the source also infuses this table to exist. Another way we see this is the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the Alter Rebbe all tell us that when a person learns Talmud, when we learn the intricacies of the Talmud being predominantly a dry legalistic document, right? It is the conversations of rabbis talking about things like, your ox gored my cow, right? So when I'm deep in the study of oxen goring cows, I can't be thinking about God. Because if I'm thinking about God, I can't be thinking about how the ox gored the cow. But I have to think about how the ox gored the cow, because my job is to understand the law, because ultimately this is God's wisdom as it's manifest in the physical world, right? God's will and wisdom are expressed in how much the owner of the ox pays to the owner of the cow. So I have to understand that to its fullest extent, and in the time that I am engaged with thinking and understanding and reflecting and exploring from all different vantage points, the ways in which the owner of the ox owes the owner of the cow. So while I'm reflecting on all of that, I can't be thinking about God. And if I'm thinking about God, then I'm not effectively thinking about the matter at hand, which is the ox and the cow. So I have to think about the ox and the cow, and in some ways remove God from my conception at that point. But the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the Alter Rebbe all tell us that when we are engaged in a learning, in a study, like oxen goring cows, we have to take a break once an hour and reflect and meditate on the giver of the wisdom, the source of the wisdom, which is God Almighty. But I can only do that, I can only take a step back from the ox and the cow and orient towards God when I've defined my terms. When I understand what I'm doing, when I understand what's written on the page, that this is an ox and this is a cow and this is God's will and this is God's wisdom. When I then go to the meditative state, when I go to the reflective, contemplative state, I can't be thinking about the cow and the ox. I have to be thinking just about God and God's will and God's wisdom. The more I'm able to just reflect on God's essence, the more then I can bring that back into my sensitivity in seeing just how important each word and each letter is in how in what's being described in the relationship between the owner of the ox and the owner of the cow. Meaning, if I just learn it like I read the handbook at the DMV, then I'm not reading it with a lot of sensitivity, right? I'll know what the laws are about what I can and cannot do on the road and what's legal and illegal to drive, but there's no chayas there, there's no vitality there, there's no passion there. It's not alive. When I'm able to reflect on God as the giver of the Torah, to reflect on the singular essence, then when I reorient towards definition in this instance being how much Ruvain, the owner of the ox, owes Shimon, the owner of the cow, it's the sensitivity at that point is much more sophisticated because it's not just a legal work of torts, but it is a godly expression within this physical world. So that's why both of these are two different meditative realities that bring us that harmonize and synthesize our worldview as Jewish people as bringing God consciousness into this world. The Pala hafach aleph. Ve'ech yam shacha the aleph mepala davar mipuche. In ezau nirmas b'maymash zeh shekosov hu mekema shleilim ve'in ha'elam mekema. So, but what we're left with is that it seems that the aleph, which is the expanded consciousness, aleph, which is the integrated consciousness, is opposite from Pella, which is the expanded consciousness. They seem to be the opposite. But this is what the Talmud tells us, that God is the place, is the space of the world, and the world is not his space. Meaning that existence is contained within God's essence, but existence does not contain God's essence. At least, it's not the place of it. It's not the exclusive place of it. That in as much as he is the space of existence, of place, the world is not his space, is not the container of his place. So that meaning to say that he can be both hamakom, he can be the place, he can be the omnipresent, and he can also be totally removed. Alufa shalelim is beyond in some sense. It is the singular that is beyond any type of limitation. Imkein hakol echon mamash, which is to say that all of this is totally one, and the meditation is to see how both of these, while presenting as opposites, are in fact totally one, and each one is dependent upon one another. This is the on one foot, so to speak, the beginning of the meditation of the Shema, of seeing that singularity, that oneness.